Gazetteer, Wikipedia audio. A gazetteer is a geographical dictionary or directory used in conjunction with a map or atlas. It typically contains information concerning the geographical makeup, social statistics, and physical features of a country, region, or continent. Content of a gazetteer can include a subject's location, dimensions of peaks and waterways, population, gross domestic product and literacy rate. This information is generally divided into topics with entries listed in alphabetical order. Ancient Greek gazetteers are known to have existed since the Hellenistic era. The first known Chinese gazetteer was released by the 1st century, and with the age of print media in China by the 9th century, the Chinese gentry became invested in producing gazetteers for their local areas as a source of information as well as local pride. The geographer Stephanus of Byzantium wrote a geographical dictionary in the 6th century which influenced later European compilers. Modern gazetteers can be found in reference sections of most libraries as well as on the Internet. The Oxford English Dictionary defines a gazetteer as a geographical index or dictionary. It includes as an example a work by the British historian Lawrence Echard in 1693 that bore the title The Gazetteers, or Newsman's Interpreter, being a geographical index. Echard wrote that the title Gazetteers was suggested to him by a very eminent person whose name he chose not to disclose. For Part 2 of this work published in 1704, Echard referred to the book simply as the Gazetteer. This marked the introduction of the word gazetteer into the English language. Historian Robert C. White suggests that the very eminent person written of by Echard was his colleague Edmund Bohun, and chose not to mention Bohun because he became associated with the Jacobite movement. Etymology. Since the 18th century, the word gazetteer has been used interchangeably to define either its traditional meaning or a daily newspaper, such as the London Gazetteer. Gazetteers are often categorized by the type and scope of the information presented. World gazetteers usually consist of an alphabetical listing of countries, with pertinent statistics for each one, with some gazetteers listing information on individual cities, towns, villages, and other settlements of varying sizes. Short-form gazetteers, often used in conjunction with computer mapping and GIS systems, may simply contain a list of place names together with their locations in latitude and longitude or other spatial referencing systems. Short-form gazetteers appear as a place name index in the rear of major published atlases. Descriptive gazetteers may include lengthy textual descriptions of the places they contain, including explanation of industries, government, geography, together with historical perspectives, maps, and /or photographs. Thematic gazetteers list places or geographical features by theme, for example fishing ports, nuclear power stations, or historic buildings. Their common element is that the geographical location is an important attribute of the features listed. GeoNet Names Server. The GeoNet Names Server provides access to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's and the U.S. Board on Geographic Names database of foreign geographic feature names. Gazetteer editors gather facts and other information from official government reports, the census, chambers of commerce, together with numerous other sources, and organize these in digest form. In his journal article Alexander and the Ganges, the 20th century historian W.W. Tarn calls a list and description of satrapies of Alexander's empire written between 324 and 323 BC as an ancient gazetteer. Tarn notes that the document is dated no later than June 323 BC, since it features Babylon as not yet partitioned by Alexander's generals. It was revised by the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BC. In the 1st century BC, Dionysius of Halicarnassus mentioned the chronicle type format of the writing of the logographers in the age before the founder of the Greek historiographic tradition, Herodotus, saying they did not write connected accounts but instead broke them up according to peoples and cities, treating each separately. Historian Truce del S. Brown asserts that what Dionysius describes in this quote about the logographers should be categorized not as a true history but rather as a gazetteer. While discussing the Greek conception of the river delta in ancient Greek literature, Francis Silurian notes that both Ptolemy and Pausanias of the 2nd century AD provided gazetteer information on geographical terms. Perhaps predating Greek gazetteers were those made in ancient Egypt. Although she does not specifically label the document as a gazetteer, Penelope Wilson describes an ancient Egyptian papyrus found at the site of Tanis, Egypt, which provides the following for each administrative area of Egypt at the time: the name of a nome capital, its sacred bark, its sacred tree, its cemetery, the date of its festival, the names of forbidden objects, the local god, land, and lake of the city. This interesting codification of data, probably made by a priest, is paralleled by very similar editions of data on the temple walls at Edfu, for example. The Domesday Book, initiated by William I of England in 1086, was a government survey on all the administrative counties of England. It was used to assess the properties of farmsteads and landholders in order to tax them sufficiently. In the survey, numerous English castles were listed. Scholars debate on exactly how many were actually referenced in the book. However, the Domesday Book does detail the fact that out of 3,558 registered houses destroyed in 112 different boroughs listed, 410 of these destroyed houses were the direct result of castle construction and expansion. In 1316 the Nomina Villarum survey was initiated by Edward II of England. It was essentially a list of all the administrative subdivisions throughout England which could be utilised by the state in order to assess how much military troops could be conscripted and summoned from each region. The Speculum Britanniae of the Tudor-era English cartographer and topographer John Norton had an alphabetical list of places throughout England with headings showing their administrative hundreds and reference to attached maps. Englishman John Speed's Theatre of the Empire of Great Britain, published in 1611, provided gazetteers for counties throughout England, which included illustrative maps, short local histories, a list of administrative hundreds, an index of parishes, and the coordinates of longitude and latitude for county towns. Starting in 1662, the hearth tax returns with attached maps of local areas were compiled by individual parishes throughout England, while a duplicate of their records were sent to the central government offices of the Exchequer. To supplement his new large map of England from 1677, the English cartographer John Adams compiled the extensive Gazetteer Index Villaris in 1680 that had some 24,000 places listed with geographical coordinates coinciding with the map. The Geographical Dictionary of Edmund Bohun was published in London in 1688, comprising 806 pages with some 8,500 entries. In his work, Edmund Bohun attributed the first known Western geographical dictionary to geographer Stephanus of Byzantium, while also noting influence in his work from the Thesaurus Geographicus by the Belgian cartographer Abraham Ortelius, but stated that Ortelius' work dealt largely with ancient geography and not up-to-date information. Only fragments of Stephanus' geographical work Ethnica have survived and were first examined by the Italian printer Aldus Manutius in his work of 1502. The Italian monk Philippus Ferrarius published his geographical dictionary Epitome Geographicus in Quatuor Libros Divissum in the Swiss city of Zurich in 1605. He divided this work into overhead topics of cities, rivers, mountains, and lakes and swamps. All place names, given in Latin, were arranged in alphabetical order for each overhead division by geographic type. A year after his death, his Lexicon Geographicum was published, which contained more than 9,000 different entries for geographic places. This was an improvement over Ortelius' work, since it included modern place names and places discovered since the time of Ortelius. Pierre Duval, a nephew of the French cartographer Nicolas Sanson, wrote various geographical dictionaries. These include a dictionary on the abbeys of France, a dictionary on ancient sites of the Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans with their modern equivalent names, and a work published in Paris in 1651 that was both the first universal and vernacular geographical dictionary of Europe. With the gradual expansion of Laurence Eckard's Gazetteer of 1693, it too became a universal geographical dictionary that was translated into Spanish in 1750, into French in 1809, and into Italian in 1810. Types and organization. Following the American Revolutionary War, United States clergyman and historian Jeremy Belknap and Postmaster General Ebenezer Hazard intended to create the first post-revolutionary geographical works and gazetteers, but they were anticipated by the clergyman and geographer Jedediah Morse with his Geography Made Easy in 1784. However, Morse was unable to finish the Gazetteer in time for his 1784 geography and postponed it. Yet his delay to publish it lasted too long, as it was Joseph Scott in 1795 who published the first post-revolutionary American Gazetteer, his Gazetteer of the United States. With the aid of Noah Webster and Rev. Samuel Austin, Morse finally published his Gazetteer, the American Universal Geography, in 1797. However, Morse's Gazetteer did not receive distinction by literary critics, as gazetteers were deemed as belonging to a lower literary class. The reviewer of Joseph Scott's 1795 Gazetteer commented that it was little more than medleys of politics, history, and miscellaneous remarks on the manners, languages and arts of different nations, arranged in the order in which the territories stand on the map. Nevertheless, in 1802 Morse followed up his original work by publishing a new Gazetteer of the Eastern Continent with Rev. Elijah Parrish, the latter of whom Ralph H. Brown asserts did the lion's share of the work in compiling it. Gazetteers became widely popular in Britain in the 19th century, with publishers such as Fullerton, Mackenzie, Chambers, and W&A.K. Johnston, many of whom were Scottish, meeting public demand for information on an expanding empire. This British tradition continues in the electronic age with innovations such as the National Land and Property Gazetteer, the text-based Gazetteer for Scotland, and the new National Gazetteer, formerly known as the Definitive National Address Scotland National Gazetteer. In addition to local or regional gazetteers, there have also been comprehensive world gazetteers published. An early example would be the 1912 World Gazetteer published by Lippincott, Williams and Wilkins. There are also interregional gazetteers with a specific focus, such as the Gazetteer of the Swedish Atlas das Bastas Billbok, a road atlas and guide for Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark. In Han Dynasty China, the Yuezhi written in 52 AD is considered by modern sinologists and historians to be the prototype of the gazetteer, as it contained essays on a wide variety of subjects including changes in territorial division, the founding of cities, local products, and customs. However, the first gazetteer proper is considered to be the Chronicles of Huiyang by Chong Chu. There are over 8,000 gazetteers of pre-modern China that have survived. Gazetteers became more common in the Song dynasty, yet the bulk of surviving gazetteers were written during the Ming dynasty and Qing dynasty. Modern scholar Lu Weihai notes that just under 400 gazetteers were compiled in the era between the fall of the Han dynasty in 220 and the Tang dynasty. Gazetteers from this era focused on boundaries and territory, place names, mountains and rivers, ancient sites, local products, local myths and legends, customs, botany, topography, and locations of palaces, streets, temples, etc. By the Tang dynasty the gazetteer became much more geographically specific, with a broad amount of content arranged topically. For example, there would be individual sections devoted to local astronomy, schools, dikes, canals, post stations, altars, local deities, temples, tombs, etc. By the Song dynasty it became more common for gazetteers to provide biographies of local celebrities, accounts of elite local families, bibliographies, and literary anthologies of poems and essays dedicated to famous local spots. Song gazetteers also made lists and descriptions of city walls, gate names, wards and markets, districts, population size, and residences of former prefects. In 610 after the Sui dynasty united a politically divided China, Emperor Yang of Sui had all the empire's commanderies prepare gazetteers called maps and treatises so that a vast amount of updated textual and visual information on local roads, rivers, canals, and landmarks could be utilized by the central government to maintain control and provide better security. Although the earliest extant Chinese maps date to the 4th century BC, and to Jing since the Qin or Han dynasties, this was the first known instance in China when the textual information of Tijing became the primary element over the drawn illustrations. This Sui dynasty process of providing maps and visual aids in written gazetteers as well as the submitting of gazetteers with illustrative maps by local administrations to the central government was continued in every subsequent Chinese dynasty. Historian James M. Hargett states that by the time of the Song dynasty, gazetteers became far more geared towards serving the current political, administrative, and military concerns than in gazetteers of previous eras, while there were many more gazetteers compiled on the local and national levels than in previous eras. Emperor Taizhu of Song ordered Liu Duosun and a team of cartographers and scholars in 971 to initiate the compilation of a huge atlas and nationwide gazetteer that covered the whole of China proper, which comprised approximately 1,200 counties and 300 prefectures. This project was completed in 1010 by a team of scholars under Song Xuan, who presented it in 1566 chapters to the throne of Emperor Zhenzong. This Sui dynasty process of infrequently collecting Tijing or map guides continued, but it would be enhanced by the matured literary genre of Fangzi or treatise on a place of the Song dynasty. Although Zhang Qiao of the 12th century did not notice the Fangzi while writing his encyclopedic Tongzi including monographs to geography and cities, others such as the bibliographer Chen Zhensen of the 13th century were listing gazetteers instead of the map guides in their works. The main differences between the Fangzi and the Tijing was that the former was a product of local initiative, not a central command according to Peter K. Ball, and were usually 10, 20, or even 50 chapters in length compared to the average 4 chapters for map guides. Furthermore, the Fangzi were almost always printed because they were intended for a large reading audience, whereas Tijing were exclusive records read by the local officials who drafted them and the central government officials who collected them. Although most Song gazetteers credited local officials as the authors, already in the Song there were bibliographers who noted that non-official literati were asked to compose these works or did so on their own behalf. By the 16th century during the Ming dynasty, local gazetteers were commonly composed due to local decision-making rather than a central government mandate. Historian Peter K. Ball states that local gazetteers composed in this manner were the result of increased domestic and international trade that facilitated greater local wealth throughout China. Historian R. H. Britnell writes of gazetteers in Ming China. By the 16th century, for a county or monastery not to have a gazetteer was regarded as evidence that the place was inconsequential. While working in the Department of Arms, the Tang dynasty cartographer Zhu Dan and his colleagues would acquire information from foreign envoys about their respective homelands, and from these interrogations would produce maps supplemented by textual information. Even within China, ethnographic information on ethnic minorities of non-Han peoples were often described in the local histories and gazetteers of provinces such as Guizhou during the Ming and Qing dynasties. As the Qing dynasty pushed further with its troops and government authorities into areas of Guizhou that were uninhabited and not administered by the Qing government, the official gazetteers of the region would be revised to include the newly drawn-up districts and non-Han ethnic groups therein. While the late Ming dynasty officials who compiled the information on the ethnic groups of Guizhou offered scanty details about them in their gazetteers, the later Qing dynasty gazetteers often provided a much more comprehensive analysis. By 1673 the Guizhou gazetteers featured different written entries for the various Miao peoples of the region. Historian Laura Hallstetter writes on the woodblock print illustrations of Miao peoples in the Guizhou Gazetteer, stating the 1692 version of the Kangxi-era gazetteer show a refinement in the quality of the illustrations by comparison to 1673. Historian Timothy Brooke states that Ming dynasty gazetteers demonstrate a shift in the attitudes of Chinese gentry towards the traditionally lower merchant class. As time went on, the gentry solicited funds from merchants to build and repair schools, print scholarly books, build Chinese pagodas on auspicious sites, and other things that were needed by the gentry and scholar officials in order to succeed. Hence, the gentry figures composing the gazetteers in the latter half of the Ming period spoke favorably of merchants, whereas before they were rarely mentioned. Brooke and other modern sinologist historians also examine and consult the local Ming gazetteers to compare population info with the contemporary central government records, which often provided dubious population figures that did not reflect the actually larger population size of China during the time. History. Western world. Although better known for his work on the Gujin Tushujikan Encyclopedia, the early to mid-Qing scholar Zhang Tingzi aided other scholars in the compilation of the Daking Yi Tongzi. This was provided with a preface in 1744, revised in 1764, and reprinted in 1849. Hellenistic and Greco-Roman eras. Medieval and early modern eras. Modern era. East Asia. China. The Italian Jesuit Matteo Ricci created the first comprehensive world map in the Chinese language in the early 17th century, while comprehensive world gazetteers were later translated into Chinese by Europeans. The Christian missionary William Muirhead, who lived in Shanghai during the late Qing period, published the Gazetteer de li Quanzi, which was reprinted in Japan in 1859. Divided into 15 volumes, this work covered Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific Ocean archipelagos, and was subdivided further into sections on geography, topography, water masses, atmosphere, biology, anthropology, and historical geography. Chinese maritime trade gazetteers mentioned a slew of different countries that came to trade in China, such as United States vessels docking at Canton in the Yue Haiguanzi, published in 1839. The Chinese-language gazetteer Haiguo Tuzi by Wei Yuan in 1844 was printed in Japan 2 decades later, 1854. This work was popular in Japan not for its geographical knowledge, but for its analysis of potential defensive military strategy in the face of European imperialism and the Qing's recent defeat in the First Opium War due to European artillery and gunboats. Continuing an old tradition of fangzi, the Republic of China had gazetteers composed and created national standards for them in 1929, updating these in 1946. The printing of gazetteers was revived in 1956 under Mao Zedong and again in the 1980s, after the reforms of the Deng era to replace the people's communes with traditional townships. The Dai Fangzi effort under Mao yielded little results, while the writing of Dai Fangzi was interrupted during the Cultural Revolution, trumped by the village and family histories which were more appropriate for the theme of class struggle. A Li Baiyu of Shangzi forwarded a letter to the CCP propaganda department on May 1, 1979, which urged for the revival of Dai Fangzi. This proposal was sponsored by Hu Yaobang in June 1979, while Hu Qiaomu of the CCP Politburo lent his support for the idea in April 1980. The first issue of a modern national journal of Dai Fangzi was issued by January 1981. In Korea, scholars based their gazetteers largely on the Chinese model. Like Chinese gazetteers, there were national, provincial, and local prefecture Korean gazetteers which featured geographic information, demographic data, locations of bridges, schools, temples, tombs, fortresses, pavilions, and other landmarks, cultural customs, local products, resident clan names, and short biographies on well-known people. In an example of the latter, the 1530 edition of Xinjiang Tonggukiji Ting Nam gave a brief statement about Pak Yen, noting his successful career in the civil service, his exceptional filiality, his brilliance in music theory, and his praisable efforts in systematizing ritual music for Sejong's court. King Sejong established the Joseon dynasty's first national gazetteer in 1432, called the Sinchen Pialdo. With additional material and correction of mistakes, the title of this gazetteer was revised in 1454 as the Sejong Silok Chiraji, updated in 1531 under the title Xinjiang Tonggukaji Ting Nam, and enlarged in 1612. The Joseon Koreans also created international gazetteers. The Yejisong Nam Gazetteer, compiled from 1451 to 1500, provides a small description for 369 different foreign countries known to Joseon Korea in the 15th century. Korea. In Japan, there were also local gazetteers in pre-modern times, called fudoki. Japanese gazetteers preserved historical and legendary accounts of various regions. For example, the Nara period provincial gazetteer Harima no Kuni Fudoki of Harima province provides a story of an alleged visit by Emperor Jin in the 3rd century while on an imperial hunting expedition. Local Japanese gazetteers could also be found in later periods such as the Edo period. Gazetteers were often composed by the request of wealthy patrons. For example, 6 scholars in the service of the daimyo of the Ikeda household published the Bai-Kokushi Gazetteer for several counties in 1737. World gazetteers were written by the Japanese in the 19th century, such as the Kanyozu Shiki published by Mitsukuri Shigo in 1845, the Hakushi by Mitsukuri Genpo in 1856, and the Bankokuzushi, which was written by an Englishman named Colton, translated by Sawa Ginger, and printed by Tezukaritsu in 1862. Despite the ambitious title, the work by Genpo only covered Europa Bulletin while the planned section for Asia was not published. In pre-modern India, local gazetteers were written. For example, Manat Nainsi wrote a gazetteer for the Marwar region in the 17th century. B.S. Balaga writes that the history of the gazetteer in Tamil Nadu can be traced back to the classical corpus of Sangam literature, dated 200 BC to 300 AD. Abu al-Fazl ibn Mubarak, the vizier to Akbar the Great of the Mughal Empire, wrote the An-e-Akbari, which included a gazetteer with valuable information on India's population in the 16th century. The pre-modern Islamic world produced gazetteers. Cartographers of the Safavid dynasty of Iran made gazetteers of local areas. Examples of electronic world gazetteers can be found at Japan, South Asia, Muslim world. List of gazetteers worldwide. Antarctica, Asia, Australia, Europe, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Canada, New Zealand, Russia, South Africa, Turkey, United Kingdom, United States. Thematic gazetteers. Notes.